You need a paring chisel. You need a 3mm chisel or a fine file. You need a file, a steel hammer or a wooden mallet. Probably around 225 grams is a good size to adjust a plane. I guess a plane this size you could go up to about 375 grams. This one's a bronze hammer, so it's going to be slightly softer than the steel in the blade, which is great because it's not going to misshape the blade. Then I'm just using a little plane, but you could also use a paring chisel for the job of this. The first step in tuning the plane is to flatten the back of the blade and to sharpen it, and that's because this could slightly affect the pressure of this wedge shape, because you're actually going to be taking a fraction of a mil off this back of the blade. The next step would be to increase this bevel. So this bevel here is designed to be hit with a hammer, and you hit this bevel at the same angle as the blade goes into the block. And that's basically what happens is, because the metal is dense, much more dense than the wood, the metal stays where it is and the block of wood moves away from the blade, and that's how you get the blade out. Okay, so I'm just going to take a plane and shave off some of this bevel. So as I said, you can use a chisel to take off some of this bevel. I also like to do these corners, because if you hit them with a hammer you'll probably split them out. Okay, so we've got the bevel done. Okay, so now the next step is to position the blade, and we're going to see how the actual blade falls down the plane. And as I said, each plane will be different, so you'll get slightly different pressure in different areas, and they'll all require a slight modification. So at the moment, what we're going to do is just going to tap the blade down, and we're going to let it naturally fall down into the blade, into the plane. Until it's almost out the back of the sole. So with a Japanese hammer, you've got a convex side and a flat side, and it's good to use the convex side, and it just means you're not going to damage the metal as much here, and you're not going to damage the wood. So it's almost out. So a really good method of testing to see the blade is by putting it on a white background and looking down, and you can, I'm not sure you can see that there, but basically can get an idea of how the blade is sticking out. You also may have noticed that the sound changed as I was hitting it in. It gets a higher pitch, and you're aiming for about 5 good hits of a hammer to be almost in position. So this one seems a little bit tight. So just to take it out again, we'll hit the back. And you can hear that pitch sound, that pitch change to a lower pitch sound when the blade is free. So what I noticed there is that it was a bit tight. So what we're going to do is get a pencil and we're going to shade the back of this blade in. Because what we're going to do is remove some of this material from the bed of the plane. Again, you can hear that pitch change. So we've come out the back of the sole now, and both times it's come out pretty evenly. But what we have to look for now is that we need a gap on each side of the blade. So we want to about a 0.5 of a mil gap on each side. And so the best way to do that is to hold it up to a light and look down, directly down that side and this side. So at the moment we can see this side is really close. It's actually the blade is touching the wood, and this is about 0.5 mil or slightly more. So we know we're going to have to take a little bit of material off this side. At the same time, we notice that the blade is very firmly in there, so we can take a bit of material off the bed. So I'm just going to get my 3mm chisel now and run it. Along this edge, just to relieve a bit of material so we can get that lateral movement for adjusting the blade square to the sole. Now we'll also take some of this pressure off the back. You can see that the blade is touching pretty much just in the middle here. So I just want to shave a little bit of this material off. So using a chisel as a plane almost, because you're using the back of the chisel and running it flat against the wood, and just take a really small amount off it every time until you get it right, because it's pretty crucial that it keeps a good amount of pressure. Again, listen for the sound. See that's come out beautifully now. And we can see we've got a little bit of gap here now, a little bit of gap here. So I'm pretty sure that's all we need to do for this plane. Because I can see now when it comes out, when when the blade comes out the sole, it comes out pretty square. So we're just going to fit the blade back in now. We're going to hear the sound, listen out for the sound, the pitch change. And that's a really nice indication of how tight the blade is and if it's almost down to the sole. So you can see now that the blade is just sticking out a little bit on this side. So what we need to do is relieve some pressure off this side. So the blade is sliding down really easily on this side, and it's got probably a bit more pressure on the back of the bed of the blade on this side, which prevents this side from coming down. The other possibility is that the actual wedge of the blade, the side of the blade, is touching on this side, which prevents it coming down square. So again, I'm going to just take a little bit off this side. You can see instantly that my pencil marks have got more on this left hand side, which indicates there's a lot of pressure here. Okay, again, just taking a fraction of material off at a time. So we're getting to about those 5 hits and the blade's pretty much out the back of the sole. So I'm really happy with that. That came out quite square to the sole, and I've got both adjustment can make the blade pop out either side, which is a great indication of having enough space as well on either side of the blade. The next step is, once you've relieved a bit of the pressure, taken the sides out, is to fit the chip breaker. So what we're going to do, so make sure the blade is almost out the sole, and you're going to fit the chip breaker in now, and just push it down by hand as far as you can go. And that's actually a great pressure there, because we want the chip breaker to end up at about 0.2 of a mil behind the blade. So that's perfect. You don't want the chip breaker too tight that it's going to affect your adjustment after you set the blade, but you want it to have about 10% of pressure onto the blade and hold itself very nicely. Remember, it's not actually cutting, so it's not getting direct contact with the timber, except after it hits the blade, it's just going to break the back of the timber and push it up away from the blade, so it stops any of that. It stops the blade sort of running underneath the grain and splitting it out. So if your chip breaker didn't fit, I'll show you how to adjust it. First of all, you've got to make sure that it's square. So this will need some slight adjustment, because you want to have these 3 points, the front of the blade and these 2 high points of the chip breaker all touching perfectly. And at the moment you can hear that it's just rocking on this corner and this corner. So we're just gonna file a tiny amount off this corner. Again, just check to see the rocking. Okay, it's still rocking slightly. So a tiny bit more. Okay. So if the chip breaker was too loose, you need to fold these edges over a bit, and that would be done by getting a hard surface, a bit of metal, and knocking those corners over a little bit more, bending them down. Okay, job done. So again, put the blade in, let it run down square. Push the chip breaker in, and again on a white background, you can see how close the chip breaker is to the blade. Really important not to push the chip breaker over the blade, otherwise you'll damage your blade. So again, white background, and you can easily see the colour difference between the chip breaker and the back of the blade, especially when the blade is polished. Set it up and you're ready to go.